Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Let's hop in. Today is October 31st, Halloween. Had a bit of a power flicker right before I was about to stream, so yeah. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. There were some issues and stuff that popped up yesterday, but they're not marked as new today, so I guess if you just click the X through this, it automatically marks it as red. Let's see. So this is interesting. This has changed around a little bit. So as far as I assume, this means that in Japan it's already November 1st, which means we select that, and then that'll probably just immediately disappear. But we missed like 6 days out of the month, and in all honesty, I'm surprised I'm even going that far. They definitely have changed this though, so now you don't lose the next day's spectate if you don't actually claim the previous day's spectate, which is nice, but doesn't change too much, really. So then I would assume that that means the month is over. You have 29 days left to buy this mate if you want to. Everything else seems to be the same. It doesn't really feel like anything new is available. We have 10 days to potentially buy this or more of these, but I don't think there would be an argument to buying more of those. So 10 days to potentially save up more gems for the next one of these selection packs. So yeah, the event's gone, and this ends. So if we got really lucky, ideally we would want to move up to rank 2 gold, rank 1 gold, and then rank 5 platinum, and that's probably our best case scenario. The chances of getting up to diamond rank 5 is pretty low. But just getting to platinum means you don't drop down to silver 5 or silver 1 or whatever it is when the month ends. So over the weekend I played a little bit of Darkest Dungeon. I spent a lot of time working on my guest Raspberry Pi Wi-Fi setup, working on wrapping it up and writing up the documentation, which that's always a frustrating, slow process that I'm not particularly good at, I would say. I mean, throwing that in the graveyard is probably not a terrible idea. I watched this show on Amazon Prime called The Devil's Hour, which is a pretty good like drama sequence, mystery sequence that has about 6 episodes. It definitely looks and feels, based on the actors, like a BBC drama series, and the danger in that is that it ends on kind of a cliffhanger without really resolving anything, and a lot of BBC or British shows, not just BBC shows, end up ending on cliffhangers. Yeah, as much as people might complain about everything being made in the United States compared to like British shows, Canadian shows, Indian shows, or any other country's shows, the truth of the matter, I think, has to be also admitted that the United States TV shows have the budget and the lack of ideas as far as competition enough that shows will be given a lot more opportunity to actually wrap up and finish. There is, particularly as far as British actors, a lack of interest in staying around and finishing a series. It seems like they pretty much negotiate a contract every season instead of starting off with like a 3-year starter contract. And we could certainly try to argue the differences in the early contracts for TV actors versus after season 5, where they start negotiating and renegotiating for more and more money. But yeah, like the fact that Peter Capaldi, who played as Doctor Who, was a major character, although in all fairness, in The Devil's Hour, he basically is sitting down in a room for the vast majority of the time in the series. So he does have a couple of action sequences that try to balance that out, but mostly he is just sitting. And I think maybe he is kind of old enough that it would make sense that that would appeal or make sense to him to do that. But yeah, my main concern on this, and why I wouldn't really recommend watching The Devil's Hour, is going to come down to the thought that you're not going to get a complete story. Darn it. I was going to attack the other one with that, but whatever. Probably watch some other shows. I started to try to pay attention to the Great British Bake Off on Netflix. They have a new season of that. This is the point that happened a couple years ago, it feels like, where they got rid of Mary Berry when they changed channels. Some kind of negotiation thing happened there. And the very first scene of the very first episode definitely shows a different kind of feel for the skits that they were doing, because up until that point I don't believe I've ever seen a skit. Let's see what happens here. Probably nothing. I don't think I've ever seen a skit in the Great British Bake Off that wasn't just shot very cheaply on the lawn where they set up their tent and do their cooking. And I don't believe I've ever seen a skit that involved the two main bakers. So for them to start off with something fairly big to do a dumb skit as a setup around Star Wars in what looked like probably a cheap green screen area, is a big difference in having all 4 of the main presenters like having all 4 of the main presenters on screen at the same time is different. The actual cooking seems to not really have changed any, which I don't see a real reason why you would want to change any of that. Would any of that be worth anything? if I sent this back and tried to get something more expensive, and then use this to then sacrifice that and that. Almost certainly I watched some other stuff, but I can't remember any of it. So it probably wasn't that important. I should talk probably more about Darkest Dungeon. It is doing like hour 30 to 2 hour long episodes. It is kind of slow going even at that, whereas those longer grind sessions really should make more progress. That more was definitely revealed probably since I last talked about it, in that there's blueprints now that they've introduced, and that if you have a massive amount of resources, you can build these extra buildings to build up your estate. So there is this kind of city management concept, although it really is just a flat 2D screen, and these extra buildings seem like they are just extra bonuses. And honestly, it scares me more than it inspires me, just because of the high amount of resources it needs, because it really does imply that the final run of Darkest Dungeon is nowhere close to where I am, and that it is going to be just incredibly difficult to get to that point. I managed to get upgrades up enough that sometimes now when I can recruit new characters, they will be level 1 instead of level 0, but I imagine I need characters up somewhere around level 10 or at least level 6, and I imagine I need probably 12 characters up at that level. You could potentially have one main team and then skip a week, or do a very simplistic type of experience on the off weeks, so that the main team reduces stress. And yes, as you slowly play through it, you will reduce the amount of gold you're wasting to upgrade characters or reduce their stress. Mostly you're just reducing their stress. But it definitely still feels like I'm in a position where I just need to find the shortest, easiest runs I can possibly do, and go through them and try to succeed at them. And if I don't really succeed at them, then flee before getting an entire team killed. I did manage to get an entire team killed, and that would have been the point where the game really should have helped you more, I would think. Like, once an entire team was killed, there should be some kind of care package that says, hey, we're going to give you some extra gold, we're going to give you some extra artifact or something. It is interesting around the idea of a Darkest Dungeon that you can't like sacrifice characters that you've invested in to recoup gold or resources or anything like that, because that would also make some sense. All you can really do is dismiss characters, and dismissing them just gives you room to recruit new characters, and new characters aren't going to have gold on them. They aren't going to have items on them, as far as I can tell, or even upgraded armor or weapons, which the armor and the weapon slots are very small and very few, so I don't think the game really centers around items and armor and weapons. Those are all features that frankly could have been left on the cutting room floor in favor of a madness mechanic that could have been focused on even more. There are just a lot of gameplay mechanics in Darkest Dungeon, and I'm not sure all of them make the most amount of sense. But yeah, I lost an entire team, really didn't care. Lost some characters that maybe had a little bit of experience on them, really didn't care. It just all feels so unimportant. Like, so when the whole thing plays out that way, and the whole experience just feels fairly unimportant, then it does dangerously get close to it does dangerously get close to just a grind fest, and I could see myself just losing interest with Darkest Dungeon and stop playing and just ending on a whimper instead of really a rage quit. We may be getting slower news today because I started a little bit earlier, not really though, or just because it's Halloween. At a certain level, there's not the best of an excuse for people to be slow on a Halloween day. As far as video game news journalists. And yeah, you may see cosplayers or paid cosplayers. A lot of these probably aren't paid cosplayers, but if I was 2K, I would be paying some level of cosplayers to dress up as my characters in a video game over and over again. At the very least, you would try to find somebody, a single cosplayer who could be your main model and put some real emphasis on that. Somebody who might work cheap or work for free to be promoted. Although you do run into an interesting problem there, that if you were going to effectively try and find one of those cosplayers that would have gone down the path of being a Twitch slot or an OnlyFans presenter, somebody who would have done something that would have probably ruined a lot of opportunities to be a more subtle cosplayer, you would have to get them fairly early and say, alright, have you shown your, for lack of a better way to phrase this, find a cosplayer who hasn't shown their butthole on the internet yet and say, alright, instead of you getting an OnlyFans or put that off until later, let's build your brand somewhat and have you cosplay our video game character over and over again. But you have to have a pretty iconic characters too to do that, or you have to have a whole collection of characters like that. Overwatch 1 probably would have been a great example of that, where Activision Blizzard had said, hey, let's run a search for people who would want to cosplay, let's throw them some money for their materials, and let's promote them quite a bit, but let's also get them under a morals clause so that they aren't wearing Tracer's outfit, but also on their OnlyFans wearing Tracer's outfit while doing porn. Of course, particularly in Overwatch 1, they didn't really embrace fan art or cosplaying that much, considering the characters they designed and how they were drawn. And then you'll have what definitely you wouldn't describe as cosplay and Halloween outfits. Here you have a collection of BioShock people. Although you would be forgiven if you really didn't recognize this character and had a hard time recognizing this character. And even this, as a splicer, doesn't really make the most sense. Or the little girl, the little sister here, doesn't make the most amount of sense. There is also a problem, certainly here, when you have a rated M for mature game, and people are bringing their whole family. This kid here is probably less than 10. This kid here is probably less than 15. Definitely not old enough to be representing or understanding what the game they're playing or being dressed that way. And that runs into another problem, certainly, as far as Halloween and just costume play in video games, and probably why you don't see it promoted that much as like a holiday to be interested in, is that outside of your Marios, your Sonics, and your Ash Ketchums, there's very little that is age appropriate that kids could dress up as. And that's part of the kind of consistent problem with video games anyways, is that the amount of content for kids is far too small for the amount of kids that are playing video games, and it does lead to a real lack of variety. And this next generation of gamers, of little kid gamers, I think are going to definitely feel that and complain about that a lot more. Is that, and certainly previous gamers should have felt that and a lot more too. It is definitely better now, but in the old days when Super Mario Brothers came out, that was like the only game, and there really wasn't an expectation that there would be any other games out that month or even that year or that 6-month period, because our comparison would have been to single game LCD toys or non-video game toys at all. Should we just attack this and get rid of it? Well, in this case, I think it's the same for me to use a 6 to attack this first. So we'll start with that. And then we'll attack that. There's nothing inherently video gamey around Halloween, like, and there's, with the exception of something like Costume Quest, really not anything not really that many video games around Halloween either. There are games around horror and scary stuff. The ESA could potentially try to do something out there. Like, if you were going to make a kid tracker app specifically for Halloween, then the ESA could definitely try and get one of their partner companies like Nintendo to make something like that. Otherwise, it is just going to be something as simplistic as a Steam sale. And maybe a kid tracker app isn't exactly what is wanted or needed. Maybe they're a house tracking. This is a place where candy was collected. course, the Japanese definitely don't see Halloween from the same eyes, so this Koei Tecmo here just takes this as an opportunity to draw an anime waifu character celebrating Halloween. They just see it as yet another excuse to do costume play, which they see year-round, and certainly there is an argument to be made around the idea of just doing cosplay far more often, and pretend. If anything, it is oddly puritanical, even for the people who do engage with Halloween, which I think is most in the United States. But it's still kind of oddly puritanical to say we only dress up in costumes once per year. And the history of the United States is definitely not that. There used to be costume parties all the time. People just don't have the money or time or energy, take your pick, to make and have costume parties. In fact, I think house parties in general tend to not to happen that often. Definitely not in the way that you would have had them in the old days, where you would have potentially invited a lot of people, a lot of neighbors and strangers. Now a house party is, let's all get together and watch football and eat the cheapest foods of hot dogs and hamburgers. Of course, a lot of what I'm thinking of when I think of the house parties that would have happened in the 20s to 40s probably are parties that would have been held by incredibly rich people like Howard Hughes, and definitely may not be things that even actually happened at all. But yeah, you would have expected, and I am really just rambling here, you would have kind of expected that there would have been a evolution of dressing up in costumes on like Christmas or Easter. Well, the other holidays aren't really that big enough, and at a certain level there is an aspect of dressing up nicely, which is a kind of costume by today's standards on Easter, and the ugly sweater kind of nonsense and Christmas stuff is kind of a dress-up thing for Christmas. So I guess we probably are seeing the slight evolution of that idea. It's just not as free as you can pick any other character, any character you want. Let's see if putting that face down ruins that strategy, although frankly I could just use this to ruin its strategy. I guess also, in all fairness, you're either, before the Halloween Eve happens, you're either going to have Koei Tecmo and companies showing drawings of Halloween characters, or you're going to basically see nothing because they won't want to reveal their characters until later. So it is very possible on Wednesday we will cover a great deal of costumes, and I'm just preemptively moving too fast on that idea. Come on. I need to move faster here or I'm gonna lose. Alright, so let's just start going to the news. ScumVM has a new release. 2.6.1 maintenance release, mainly focused on improving new features and engines they introduced in the previous release, upgrading several engines, which the fact that ScumVM has several engines really just shows how much it's changed, because the name is stuck, but you can see the Scum engine here is pretty much eclipsed with several other old school game engines that aren't, I think, really in any way connected to the Scum engine. They aren't derivative or anything like that. They are just engines for old games that would have been out in the general same time frame. Guess I could have attacked here. Cyan has revealed what they were teasing, and it is a Riven remake, which I guess at a certain point asks a question. Like, they were showing these like rusty zoomed in image, and here we can see this symbol, and this symbol is for Riven, I guess. I don't really recognize it that much. In the turn, Riven is in development, it says, and that's really all they've got to show for it. And then, yeah, they were doing these zoomed in things. It does put it in kind of a weird position, certainly, in that there is not really a remaster or remake of Myst that I think I would directly connect to being to this Riven remake being connected to it. Like, whatever the most recent Myst would be technically the predecessor to this Riven, but I don't think there is a remake of Myst that ever happened. And I don't know why you wouldn't remake Myst and just try to start the whole thing over again, other than the fact that they've done that multiple times already. They've resold and remastered Myst at least 5 times, if not way more than that. And oddly, I think the most recent remaster of Myst would be like a VR Myst game that was VR exclusive. And so, yeah. Maybe you get a little bit of a benefit in Riven in that you don't. We're both running out of time here. Need to move incredibly fast. You don't have to have the live action actors show up, but inherently you would need different live action actors to show up, because you still kind of need the father character. I think his name is Atris at the very beginning of Riven. If you were going to do all the same cutscenes, you would still need the I guess you would call it grandfather character showing up at the end, and you would need Catherine, the wife character. Yeah. Plus, you would need all the local characters, which those could easily be recast. And inherently, if they were going to remake the Myst series, the move to make is to obviously animate the characters. You can get a very nice looking animated character these days without a lot of work. I did hear some backstory secrets as far as the development of Portal, and where they actively went out of their way to not render a human so the game didn't look dated in a few years. But even in this case of Portal 2, which is what they were talking about, that would have been definitely a different experience than now. Like nowadays I think you make an Unreal Engine 5 random generated NPC through their MetaHuman software, and it will look decent for at least the next 10 years, if not a lot longer. Although in all fairness, for the Riven games and the Myst games, those games are very possibly going to be played for a lot longer than 10 years. But yeah, I just don't think you ever get past the point where you're going to need to have animated characters instead of live action characters. Or you could double down on the same idea and say, hey, let's stick with the live action because it's tradition, but let's get new actors. Which they certainly could pull that off too. Like, it wouldn't be that hard to get live action actors in the Myst series. Maybe there would be some weirdness if Chris Pratt or some famous face turned out to be the face of Atreus, the father character, and showed up over and over again, but even that wouldn't be that weird. Alright, let's just activate this. Flipping it face down did prevent the function from activating. So they link to a frequently asked question as far as this Riven remake. Are you working on a remake of Riven? The answer is yes. Is this remaster or a form of ground up modern remake? It's modern remake. Is this remake point and click only like the original, or is it transversable in 3D space? The remake will be fully transversable in 3D space. Any other supported navigation methods will be announced at a later date, which is, at a certain level, it's probably not that hard to make something point and click and have a point and click mode if you wanted to have that. Why did this take so long? It's been 25 years. Riven is one of the most highly regarded games in science history. We didn't want to approach it lightly or frivolously. Signing as a small indie studio, we wanted to make sure we could take on such a difficult, costly, and complicated endeavor and do it well. Is this the Starry Expanse project? No, this is a from ground up remake of Riven from Cyan. However, the Starry Expanse team did assist in kicking off the project. See our blog post here for more details on that. I don't even know what the Starry Expanse project is, which is shocking to me because I would have thought that I would have been following closely enough to have known everything about what Cyan is doing. I think it is also probably worth mentioning that if they are announcing a Riven remake, then their new game in a totally new world is either completed at this point, and now they're trying to drum up news or excitement by stealing excitement from their new game. Yeah, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, does it? So either they've abandoned their new game, or their new game they think is going to just be out and announced fairly recently. You would expect in the next 2 weeks they would announce that their new game, which I don't even remember the name of, is done and will be available fairly quickly, and then they're hoping that people will write stories about their new game now that they've announced that they're working on a new Riven game. Cyan is a small indie studio, probably because of their own fault, really. But the alternate universe of Cyan would have almost certainly been that they would have been a studio acquired by Ubisoft. All that time just to lose. Ridiculous. Yeah, they almost certainly would have been acquired by Ubisoft in an alternate universe and then shut down by Ubisoft. And so, at the very least, by them staying a small indie studio, the Myst series hasn't been locked behind something like Uplay, like so many other games have, or the Myst series hasn't been dragged out into something like Assassin's Creed, where half of the Assassin's Creed games are bad and they're all laden with DLC and multiplayer nonsense that they didn't need, and the true story that the original creator of Assassin's Creed that he wanted to tell has been forgotten or abandoned or just corrupted. Let's see. What platforms is it coming to? We don't have any information. If I purchased an original copy of Riven, will I get a free copy? Which of the remake? Which this is kind of a question I guess you have to write and then answer yourself. I don't know how many people legitimately would expect that if you purchased the original Riven, you would get a free copy of the remake. That's one thing I guess that remakes separate themselves from remasters, is that I don't feel like very many gamers expect to get a free copy of anything labeled as a remake, whereas a like slight remaster to HD a lot of times does kind of feel like you should get that for free. And then they're just like responding to their own question. Thanks for your support over the years, but no, this new Riven is not an update or upgrade. It's a modern from ground remake that has required and will continue to require substantial investment of resources. Sign up for the newsletter as the bottom answer. So not really anything amazingly obvious from that frequently asked questions, other than remake is said multiple times, so if it somehow didn't feel like a remake, there would be a problem there. At a certain level, I do question how much of a remake can Riven be without irritating people. If there literally was a completely different island called Riven, or a completely different age called Riven, with a completely different story and completely different puzzles, people almost certainly wouldn't be happy about that. If the puzzles were slightly different, I don't think people would be too upset with that. And if the story was slightly different, I don't think people would be too upset with that. Inherently, I kind of feel like there should be some kind of original timeline and then a new timeline for the Myst series. That there should have been a Myst remake that came out that totally changed things, totally changed the ending, maybe showed the father as the bad guy after all. Like, since one of the brothers was a raving lunatic in the first game and the other brother was much more of a smoother operator, you could potentially pull a trick there where the father really was the bad guy and then the smooth operator really was the good guy, and then that would set you up for a completely different universe. It would be harder certainly to go the other way and have the raving lunatic character be the good guy. That would be your main character you follow through Mist and Riven and potentially even more sequels. But the better move, I think, would have been probably to not go down that route at all and have a Mist remake that is set hundreds of years in the future or hundreds of years in the past, and then you could have a Riven remake that goes to the age of Riven, hundreds of years in the future, hundreds of years in the past, which the mystery of how Riven would even still be standing, since it was an age that was collapsing in the original timeline, would be a mystery enough. But there is definitely some weirdness around the Riven remake, because the numbering system is going to have to be randomized or in some other way changed. Otherwise, people who are fans of Riven already will know how to read the numbering system. Anyways. And if you know how to read the numbering system or read the Dunny language, that's gonna make the game super easy. Maybe that's the goal, though, is to make a remake that is more approachable and easier to deal with. In a lot of ways, this is kind of the thing I didn't want Cyan to do. Not that I would not that I'm particularly upset or that I'd boycott it or anything like that, but I was much more enthusiastic and am still much more interested in the newer games in a new series than I was in remakes yet again of the older series, which Cyan really only has the Mist series. Like, they're not gonna make a remake of something like Manhole, which nobody even remembers or knows anything about. Alright, moving on. My macro decided to have some trouble, so I had to launch the follow list, clean up a couple times. So we got some follow list games. Here we have a World Rally Championship that we can put on the wish list. Although, at some point I might decide to be a little bit more critical as to how many racing games or car games. See, and this is, for this game, Wood Salt, this is one of those games where it's a little deceptive because we see the SteamDB rating, and I don't know where they get that. Because looking at actual ratings listed here of the 4 reviews, there's 3 positive and 1 negative. I'm already yawning today. So Sleepy Monday. But you would think that that would put it at exactly 25% as far as the SteamDB review. What happens if I click this? Let's see. I should probably read this. Alright, the opponent didn't play. Let's take a bit of a pause and read this. They noticed a pretty cool algorithm going on. SteamDB has informed me they like the formula, and it seems a lot of users would agree that it produces better results than Wilson's scores intervals. Lower bound, aka old formula. Like, could you just explain the numbers to me? games with more reviews should have an adjusted rating that's closer to the real rating, because the more reviews we have, the more certain we are that the score they give us are correct. All ratings should be based towards the average rating, biased towards the average rating of 50%. So maybe there's a 50% bias there. For every 10 times the reviews we have, we should be 2 times more certain that the ratings are correct. Almost good, but we can't quite figure out what 2 times more certain means. Well, it seems like the math here is you have the total reviews, which in that previous example was 4 times reviews. Positive reviews plus negative reviews. And your review score is your positive reviews over total reviews. So that would be 3 over 4, which, okay, 3/4. Then your rating is review score minus your review score in a minus 0.5. Okay, so what was that? 3/4 minus 3/4 minus, what would 3/4? 1/2 or 2/4? 3/4, 2/4, 1/4, then times 2 to the logarithmic power of 10 times the total reviews plus 1. 4 plus 1 would be 5, and then 2 to the negative logarithmic of 10, I guess. That's a negative log of 10. Maybe too complicated of math for me, but I would guess what this means is 5 decimal places. So it would probably be 0.00005. Multiply that times 2. 0.0002. That would seem like that wouldn't even really change anything. So 3/4 times, if we just ignore this section and just strike that all out to be 1, 3/4 minus 1/4 should be 50%. But this obviously does something more to it. Well, suffice it to say that that does get you to about 50%. But that seems like that is an oddly biased algorithm that doesn't quite make sense when you really only have 2 reviews. And arguably, I would say that this system is a little bit better to have people that actually pay for the game's reviews count more. I hate to say money equals votes in any system, but in consumerism, in capitalism, it kind of does make sense. Enough so that I think we should probably get rid of the Steam DB rating. It's not helping me. So let's see if we can just get rid of that. Let's see. Preview what that looks like. It's all in the way, so I can't see. That's not what I wanted. may have a hard time blocking this though. The problem here is I could get rid of it by this filter, but that could change. I would want something that was labeled better. So yeah, I don't think I can block that quite as well. And at a certain point, maybe a SteamDB, while it is very valuable here, I've found it's not very valuable here. And there was also a SteamDB link up here that I blocked also just because that wasn't really that valuable either. Showing off cards we get, it's probably not worth it. But yeah, maybe I shouldn't have researched that on screen, but that definitely is something I needed to research. As for this game, this has to leave the fall list. There's just not enough relevancy to it. This Whittled Deluxe is rated very positively, so I guess we'll go with Mob Rule on that one. There is something I think just nice in general of seeing a 90% positive reviews versus 78% score, which I guess inherently does point out that I am maybe not that interested in seeing an actual score when looking at games to potentially buy, because I don't trust people's scores that much. And certainly some of that is the fact that mainstream video game reviewers do tend to give almost everything a 7 out of 10 or 75 out of 100, and so the scale has just been so broken in people's minds, in my mind in particular, that I can't even really feel comfortable in a world where one person tried to give something a score of a 5.0 out of 10 and said, well, that's an average game. You certainly could consider even more complicated, crazy systems that perhaps there should be a date connected to review scores with an ever-growing scale. Like if Atari and Pong was, say, given a 10 out of 10 for that first generation of game, because there was no competition to it, and then Mario was given like an 11 to say it was one better than Pong, Super Mario Brothers, and then Super Mario Bros. 2 was potentially given a 11 too, because that's still within the same generation. Yeah, I could see the idea of kind of having like a major number and giving scores that were like 1.10 versus Super Mario World for the Super NES being a 2.10, just so that the numbers can't be equated, and maybe you don't have just a single generation number as much as you have entire year numbers in the score. More information in the score, or more information than any labeling system, would make a lot of sense. If you were to, say, rate jigsaw puzzles, just to pick something random, it would make a lot of sense to have a rating system where the first number is the number of pieces. So a baby puzzle with 12 pieces would be like 12, and then a rating system out of 100 could be assigned after the as the minor number. So a good 12-piece puzzle would be a 12.100. A bad 12-piece puzzle would be 12.1 or 12.0, and then a puzzle that has 5,000 pieces would be like 5,000 point something, 100 or 0 or something in between. But even that system fairly quickly gets complicated and confusing. And of course, you really do just go down the path of insanity when you try to categorize things and rate things or organize things at all. And computers can try that, but even computers can't really succeed if the reviews are subjective or the metrics are subjective. Here we have another game on the fall list that has to leave just for being irrelevant. Here we have a mixed game. This looks like this would have been a stealth horror game. I don't even remember this. It's weird. But not that weird. Like, if anything, I'm probably just coming to terms with the idea that some games are going to be very forgotten. Cave inspired by Aladdin. Is this a VR experience? Nope. So you have to, I guess, assume that this is just a kind of a asset flip type thought. I imagine just getting into the Cave of Wonder and seeing a bunch of asset flips is not that interesting. Like, in fact, I would say of the 40 Days, 40 Nights series of stories, of which Aladdin and really was just one story. Like, that one story isn't only that interesting. It really is only slightly interesting. So yeah, if I was going to try to make a video game based off of Aladdin, I would take a step back and say, let's instead make a video game based off of the 40 Days and 40 Nights series, in which the king, that's not what they called him, would kill all his wives after their wedding night. So he'd basically deflower these virgins and then get bored with them and execute them. And so I think it was Scheherazade, but it may have been someone else. The most recent wife starts telling these stories, and she always leaves them as to be continued, and he's interested in hearing the conclusions of the stories. And after 40 Days and 40 Nights of that, and her managing to put off having her head chopped off, he finally gives up and says, whatever, I'll stay married to you, I'll let you live, whatever the revolution there is. So there you have a much better concept in which you could have 40 almost like Telltale style games, something fairly simplistic, being told 40 stories you really don't have to write stories to, and would lead to potentially different gameplay things. Probably would work fairly nicely as a flat 2D animated point-and-click adventure game instead of an asset flip 3D game, because you're not going to do a lot of running and gunning. And if anything, the fact that there really hasn't been a game like that already made if not several games like that already made, just highlights how overly reliant and dependent game creators are to the first-person shooter concept. And if you cannot cram in the idea of running and gunning, they will not make the game nowadays in many cases. But yeah, a flat 2D point-and-click adventure game with just kind of simple puzzles would, I think, work fairly well. But yeah, this game doesn't work very well, so it's a shame. Let's see, next. I guess there was probably something here that interested me, but what's interesting here I see is that this is a free-to-play light version of a game. So, is there another version of this game? No. Need to keep on playing. Feel like I want to probably wrap up playing early today because there really isn't even, other than just trying to win, that there really isn't that much to do. Take this and take that. Bring a bunch of characters back into the hand. See, summoning that may actually prevent him from pendulum summoning. I thought that was a different card that I was playing there, but whatever. Just continue to try and summon. So my hope here is that we can activate this effect, toss this card. That doesn't work for me, which means we're pretty much screwed. And we probably lost. Coming back to this game, it says it's not mandatory to create an account with us. When you start the game, you can choose the guest option. This progress will be saved. The option to create an account with us allows you to access your Steam game from any mobile devices. So basically, this is a mobile game. I have to say, yeah, the only thing that's really interesting me here is that first intro video. And everything else here visually doesn't look that interesting. The general idea of a Metroidvania kind of is interesting, and the idea of coding kind of interesting. And so I guess this was a programming game. So yeah, I think this is kind of a game I would agonize over. So I'd say I'm gonna think about it some more and just leave it on the fall list. This is just a visual novel. People of color, which you don't see that anywhere as often as you really should. Although, in all fairness, I think it is worth pointing out that in at least one of these screenshots, you run into the problem of lighting. Even in video games, it becomes fairly difficult to properly light a character, a person of color. Without them fading off into the background. And that is certainly the consistent Hollywood problem too, is that many cinematographers and cameramen and lighting experts just cannot light people with darker colored skin at all. Like, it just does not show up on camera. And almost certainly that is something you would point out as being part of a systematic bias, in that the original camera makers were making cameras and films to take pictures of light-skinned people, and even the iPhone had this problem. So it wasn't even fixed in iPhone cameras until a couple of years ago. But yeah, original camera makers making cameras for white people, not even testing them on black people. And certainly that just feeds into itself. That's why even when you do see someone of color in most Hollywood, United States pictures, they tend to be very light-skinned. Anyways, moving on, trying to burn through things quickly, and I'm not really doing that. Wolf Strider here. Grown-up RPG about a lot of troublemakers stumbling their way through a giant mecha tournament. Well, I guess it's rated very positively, so off to the wish list it goes, although the all in black and white art style looks kind of interesting in these cutscenes, but doesn't look particularly good outside of that. This does remind me, by the way, that apparently Cyberpunk Edge Runners is based off of an Edge Runner Cyberpunk board game. So there was some fandom behind it before that point. Although, in all fairness, my opinion on it really has not changed. I do feel like gratuitous is probably the best way you would review Cyberpunk Edge Runners, and pointless would be my secondary story to say. See, this is a werewolf running through what looks like an one-scene grocery store. It's free, so I'll just say check out Wolf Riot if you want to check it out. I really probably should do that for any free game, because there's just not a high chance that I would ever cover a free game. There's no need to. It's silly to give consumer advice to play a game that's free when I can just say check it out yourself. This Woebegone Woods looks like it might have been an interesting little Christmas. I guess it's a visual novel. It looks more kind of like it might be a city management game. Oh, worker placement game. That's an interesting way to describe it, but maybe a better way than what I have been using. And then this game, doesn't look particularly polished enough to interest me. Yeah, looking at my phone, I was almost expecting, somebody got an automated text and an automated phone call. Yep. Yeah, I don't see anything here on this Wobble Dog that I really would want to play. It kind of feels like it is a bit more of a mobile game. If anything, I should just be more critical. Oh, I guess as far as the accountability section, I also didn't say that I scheduled a bunch more daily live streams. No, daily YouTube shorts, not daily live streams. I am definitely not promising daily live streams. But I did decide to change the title, and I'm going to experiment more with just a direct call to action instead of PC Game Daily, which doesn't make a lot of sense if I potentially want to do more than one, which at some point I probably need to do that. And so now it just says check out this PC game, which maybe that is where my titles could improve, is that if I did have a series that was just like check this out or check out Portal episode 5 or something like that, that would potentially maybe cause a direct click increase, but I imagine not by much. It would be insanely upsetting, frankly, if I changed just like one word on the title and didn't change the thumbnails or anything else, and then all of a sudden I'm getting hundreds if not thousands of more views. But if that did happen, I guess that would be a happy surprise. Some of these stories I think we've already covered, but I'll point it out again. Another job listing is saying Sony's new studio is working on a Naughty Dog beloved franchise, or working with Naughty Dog on a beloved franchise. Modern Warfare 2's ping system was quietly removed after a wall hack glitch. Players discovered the system could be used to track enemies, players through walls, which wouldn't exactly be the reason why you would have a ping system in the first place, is that so you could see them when you couldn't easily see them before. If you could only see them when you could easily see them before, it's not much of a system. Again, we're getting a lot of cases where the Modern Warfare 2 game is getting promoted and talked about. Here you can see a great example of that, in which they're just talking about a misprint, which, while is technically actual news, it's very much not very reasonable or actionable news to say, yeah, you can, they've put PlayStation here in French instead of Xbox. You would have expected that they might have really strained to avoid doing that, but it's probably pretty easy to yeah, it's probably pretty easy to make that mistake. If anything, that just means that not enough people actually read the back of the box, and how many people actually read the back of the boxes anyways? Like, how many proofreaders do you need? Probably 2 or 3. Phil Spencer claims scrutiny on the Xbox Activision deal is, quote, fair and warranted, but he says he's confident the acquisition will be we'll go through. What's funny here is you have a quote of fair and warranted as one word. Then you have here as a separate fair and warranted quote, which means one of these two quotes is not accurate. And then I imagine if they actually get to the exact statement, the quote mining that's happening here is see, if they're getting fair from, I would say the discussions have been very fair and honest. If that's where they get fair from, that is incredibly quote mining. And then you have a period, which you really shouldn't be quoting people past a period. It's a big acquisition, there's no doubt, another period. So they've skipped an entire sentence. Microsoft in its role in the tech industry is a very large tech company, and I do think the discussions around the acquisition of the size of this size is warranted, comma, and I've appreciated the time to go spend, which I don't even know what he means by time to go spend there. But yeah, this is a considerable amount of text to quote mine just the fair and warranted words from, to give a very different impression from what was actually said. You could have quote mined here, discussions have been very, like a fair quote would have been, discussions have been very fair and honest, or have been very fair. That's a fine quote. That's all in one sentence. That's all in one thought. Or you could have gone around and done discussions around the acquisitions is warranted, or you get rid of around the acquisition, discussions of this size is warranted, or you get rid of the size even and say discussion is warranted, and discussion ... is warranted is still within the realm of being more honest than skipping from the first sentence to the third or fourth sentence to get two words. And this is just another example of mainstream video game journalists just not being journalists and not doing a good job. And you have to just get down on your hands and knees and pray every day that the actual news journalists aren't this shady. They aren't this yellow journalistic and propaganda prone. You hope that's the case. It's very possible, depending on your news source, it isn't the case. It is very possible that a lot of news sources are out there are quote mining to push a narrative that they want to push, and that you really can't trust half the news or most of the news out there. But then unfortunately there's really no alternative, particularly in video game news, but even in the real world as far as news. Because if you just say all news is biased, all news is fake, or all news is propaganda, which, you know, there's a lot of evidence to a lot of it being that way, then at some point people are just going to give up and stop listening to the news, which then allows any random crazy person that talks to you, or any friend or family that is just straight up making things up, or they've misheard something from somebody else that they've misheard something, it puts you down even a worse path. At least people, when they are doing this kind of bad journalism, they're putting it on their website where other people can argue with it and complain about it. But if your uncle is telling you, Phil Spencer you heard that Phil Spencer said that this deal was fair and warranted, you just either take it as gospel or ignore it. There's no way to verify or check anything or even get into the details. And for video games, that's not that big of a deal. For other bits of news, that is a big deal, certainly. So, moving on, Henry Cavill is stepping down as Geralt after The Witcher Season 3, which maybe implies that there won't be a Season 4, but then they also are implying that there will be a Season 4 with a different actor. So, that's weird. Also, Henry Cavill just announced that he was going to come back and do Superman movies, so a certain weirdness. It's like he only has a certain amount of time, and he's stepping down from one TV Netflix series to go back to being Superman for probably a lot more money. I haven't gotten around to even watching the second season of The Witcher. Here they're talking about Cyberpunk for some reason. Well, I guess the Witcher games are connected to this. But yeah, they're getting Liam Hemsworth, known for his role in the Hunger Games, will take over the role for Season 4. Which, that seems weird. Particularly for the Witcher series, though, the character is done up in enough makeup and design that it may be fairly hard for people to really even notice a difference there. Like, if you're not seeing anything other than orange eyes and just silver hair. Warner Brothers also is ending Stargirl, so that's just like another example of CW shows being completed, canceled, not renewed, as I imagine they are going to work towards shuttering the CW in some ways, or at least starting all over with the CW. Because of the merger around CW. Although in all fairness, I don't think Stargirl or pretty much any of the shows have really succeeded. It'll be interesting to see if like the new Walker Texas Ranger spinoff or the new Winchester's Supernatural spinoff survives. I imagine there's a chance that those shows do survive and everything else kind of fails. Particularly since those two shows don't have too much to do with the Marvel Universe, where otherwise or DC Universe. Yeah. I feel like the smart move, and what they probably should try to do, is make a Warner Brothers streaming service like Disney Plus that's way cheaper or even free, and then they try to reboot on something like a DC Plus streaming service that starts all the DC characters over again and tries to give them lower budget streaming TV shows, even lower budget than what CW shows were. Moving on, apparently there's a band called Low Roar, and the frontman and Death Stranding contributor Ryan Karazija passed away at 40, which he's dying fairly young at 40, so, and he's in a band, so I'd almost assume that this was due to partying hard, as it were, drugs or alcohol, and less than, I imagine, just COVID or something else. Really haven't heard anybody like big so far dying of monkeypox. And in a lot of ways, monkeypox may very well just be a secondary event that follows compromised immune system people, which I imagine everybody's immune system is compromised now after COVID. Yeah. So yeah, once again, when we get these semi-obituary type articles, particularly from like Video Games Chronicles, which isn't really well known for doing this, you really don't get the reason for why they died or any real details. A virtuous recruitment video could be hinting at a Metal Gear Solid project, which, yeah, I'm sure they would love to hint at something. Like you can see here, there's a video here that says Metal Gear Solid that he's just using as a lamp stand, basically to prop up a lamp, which could mean nothing, could be an Easter egg. I seriously doubt, though, that we would get any more Metal Gear Solid games. And if we were going to get any, they probably would be very rough remakes just to make money and resell things. But see, the part of the problem is the Metal Gear Solid series is just too crazy. So a remaster or remake of the series can only go so far, in my mind. People want continuations and more of it, and I think really the whole Metal Gear series has tried to wrap up and finish things several times and kind of failed. If anything, it would make a lot of sense for Konami to take the stealth gameplay elements, which I imagine not that many people even care about, and try to make a spin-off game that feels a lot like Metal Gear Solid, but what isn't called Metal Gear anything, and instead has different characters, just to prove that these games are really not selling based on their gameplay mechanics. Hideki Kamiya says he's forever indebted to Nintendo for Bayonetta 3. Kamiya started working on the project following the cancellation of Scalebound from Microsoft, which, if anything, that may be a great example that is heard amongst developers and Japanese developers to not trust Microsoft and not do business with Microsoft and not sell their games, particularly on Xboxes, because Microsoft canceled Scalebound, which that really was a prestige project that should have been greenlit no matter what. I mean, no matter how crazy the budget would have gotten or how crazy the concept would have gotten, because Bayonetta now has become the alternate prestige project for Nintendo and the Switch, of all things. And the fact that this is really the only thing that is new news around Bayonetta 3, I think highlights how Bayonetta 3 is probably a great game according to Famitsu. It was reviewed very high, but Western game reviewers and mainstream video game journalists in the West just have no interest in talking about it, particularly if there's not a controversy. Ironically, Taylor, with her Helena Taylor here, with her claims that pretty much have been disproven in my mind now, her making a controversy and calling for a boycott got way more Western press around Bayonetta 3 than anything else. At a certain level, it almost feels like that could have been staged. I don't think it was in this case, but I wouldn't be surprised if in the next few years we see a similar staged concept. The reason why you'd want to do that a little bit better, though, is that there almost needs to be a controversy that only stirs up that stirs up very little negative reaction and yet gets a lot of people's attention. And there's better ways to do that. For instance, if there was something that was fairly obvious around Bayonetta 3 that came out that said Nintendo said Bayonetta couldn't be topless in the game, like, that would be fairly obvious. It would make a little bit of controversy, and certainly you'd phrase that different ways. Nintendo says skimpy yes, nudity no. Like, that's the kind of controversy that you could get around, although that does get dangerously into the censorship aspect, although we kind of already know that the Bayonetta series is probably censored to some level. But yeah, since that would be something people would have expected anyways, that may have gotten some people's attention. But with the Helena Taylor accusations and calling for an outright boycott, that you wouldn't go that far. Apparently God of War Ragnarok is being sold early, and the director is upset about that. Particularly, it does seem to me like it's a case where the director of God of War Ragnarok seems to constantly have a issue with something, and it just does not, like, it just doesn't really work as a concept to trust a creative director to be so opinionated outside of his art and outside of his creation. This is really what everybody hates, and I'm generalizing here by saying everybody. It's really what a lot of people hate, is when you have a director, which very possibly isn't even really the creative force behind the game, coming out outside of the game and giving any opinions at all. The most notable example of this is like J.K. Rowling. So many people still love and enjoy the Harry Potter series, but every single time J.K. Rowling is quoted on Twitter, it's a whole new mess, which she really should, like most people would prefer her just not to say anything. And same is true here. Just say nothing. And Twitter itself is potentially changing, and maybe from that some people will also are gonna change how they interact with places. Most notably, Nebel. Forgot to mention this. Let's see, Nebel here, who was a pretty big source on Twitter, almost certainly because Elon Musk has bought it, has locked down his account and changed everything to black. After some introspection, I've made the decision to focus my time and energy elsewhere and move on from Twitter. These marks the end of my video game coverage and my active participation in this platform. Thanks for everybody for the fun times. Farewell, Nebel. P.S. I'll leave this account up so that nobody gets the handle for malicious purposes. So, yeah. This potentially could be the beginning of the end as far as Twitter. It really just comes down to how many other people would potentially do the same thing. Here's a kind of interesting list of people that we overlap with as far as who Nebel follows and who I followed. So if all of a sudden YouTube gaming went away, I don't follow Lisa there, anymore. I've muted them, and pretty much for Open Critic. Tyler McVicker was Valve News Network. A lot of these will be just websites, Devolver Digital. If Warrior 64, for instance, which I stopped covering things, and yeah, if a lot of that started to really go black, and there's just no news sources at all. I haven't heard anything new since Crunchyroll bought out Right Stuff, other than the initial controversy around that. It is also possible that it is a case that Nebel just realized that there wasn't any real value to him. What he was doing was very valuable, or she, I don't know, was very valuable to other people, but he was probably spending a lot of energy to be the first to report on video game news on Twitter for very little reward for himself. There was a lot of talk of charging some kind of monthly fee. I've heard the number all over the place, from $5 to $20 to get verification per month, which for a business, $5 to $20 a month makes sense. There probably needs to be a split at some point where individuals get some other kind of verification that is different than a business verification, and just retire the blue check marks. Double Fine, by the way, is giving out a bunch of Psychonauts and Grim Fandango remastered codes in a very poor way. They're putting out codes. There's where you have to translate M equals M for Manny. But even at that, this Double Fine is giving out 7 codes here for Double Fine Remastered, and then Psychonauts 2, 8 codes, 10 codes. Like, it is a really small number of codes considering the number of followers they have at 169,000.4, which, yeah, that highlights a problem with Twitter too, is as a place to do giveaways, they never implemented anything that was actually useful for giveaways. In fact, Twitter is just shockingly low on new innovations and new features. But where do you go? That's the real problem. Is Nebel is leaving apparently video game news reporting completely. Otherwise, he would have said, "Hey, go over to something like Parler or Rumble." Or if he was more conservative, he might go down that route. But those aren't really options if you're not particularly conservative. And then maybe a more generic thing would be to go over to something like Discord and have your own Discord server, which that kind of makes sense, but there's no front page on Discord as far as I understand it, so a lot of people wouldn't move over and wouldn't understand that. Or just go back to like Facebook. Like, inherently, it makes a lot of sense at some point if somebody bought out Twitter and Facebook and just merged them together, or even Reddit, just merge those 3 websites together completely. Moving on back to video games. Multiversus patch notes, Black Adam arcade mode, and a silly queue has been added. I assume a silly queue means you're not really looking for a challenge and you just want to try out characters, which that would make a lot of sense, particularly with a Smash Brothers clone, to be able to just play with other characters without it affecting your rank. Let's see. Modern Warfare 2 has disabled weapon attachment tuning due to crashes. Again, another Modern Warfare 2 thing. Phil Spencer has acknowledged, quote, "It's been a long time," end quote, since the last big first-party title, but the exec claims 2023 will be stronger for its first-party output. It has been a long time, though. When the quote is "it's been a long time," and that's where the quote ends, then once again this could be a quote that is being particularly quote mined by Video Games Chronicles to be inaccurate. At certain points, you just shouldn't be using the quotes at all. If you're just going to misquote people or quote mine things, just surmise it in the headline. Like, really, don't even bother having a quote. It almost feels like the people in charge of Video Games Chronicles, the editor-in-chief, is saying you've got to have a quote. You've got to have a quote in every article. You've got to have this many pictures. You've got to have that, this and that. When an article should be a little bit more open towards what you can really report on. Like, I'm trying to scroll through this right now, and I don't see the phrase, "It's been a long time," is even in the main article. Is it above this fold? It's alright, here it is. One thing we've definitely heard loud and clear is it's been a long time since we've shipped what people would say is a big first party game. So that again is a it's been too long. Up here, it's been too long. It's the same words with completely different meaning, though, when you're effectively quoting somebody who's quoting somebody else. They're attributing a statement of fact from Phil Spencer that other people have said it's been too long, as Phil Spencer's agreeing and saying it's been too long, and that's just once again inaccurate. So that's 2 for 2 as far as Video Games Chronicles today, just doing a really crappy job at journalism. Yep. And yeah, maybe I'll get ambitious in the next year and try and find a new source, because if they're just going to consistently be this inaccurate, I really shouldn't be using them as a source. Let's take this game on the face and just assume that everything is being said is accurate. IKEA apparently has demanded an indie dev change his Infinite Furniture Store horror game. Swedish firm lawyers claim the store is closed. The game is called "The Store is Closed." Looks too similar to its shop. Now the problem here is I have no idea what Swedish parody laws and lawyers say, but certainly in the United States, parody would clearly be a defense against this, and the idea of having to change your entire game's visual assets is something that most game developers couldn't do. If this is actually the game and the store is just called STYR, that's very far from IKEA, and a big blue box with yellow letters probably isn't distinctive enough that IKEA would deserve any kind of... I don't even know what they're really going for here. They're going for like a general trademark concept, which that's not really what trademarks are. It really couldn't be copyright either. So it does seem like they are just making very unreasonable demands. Like, you really... The signs in a Walmart that says rollback, for instance, would have probably a trademark on the signs. But the general idea of people wearing blue vests or Walmart stores looking like grocery stores and having shelves and things like that, I don't think that would be really copyrightable. If anything, this might be a great way to promote a game nobody else would have heard about anyways. It definitely looks like a low effort asset flip game anyways. But yeah, Best Buy has big blue stores, so there's already a complaint there of things that can be similar. Like a logo certainly might be copyrightable or trademarkable, but the general idea of our stores. See, this isn't a terrible thought. The idea of an infinite store is a little weird, certainly. And it does look like there's a lot of like weird horror characters instead of just sticking to like one zombie. At a certain level, this kind of feels like something that could happen it could have been based off of the Zombies in the Mall Night of the Living Dead 2 concept. But I kind of do like the idea of a store or mall having a lot of resources that you could break down and create shelters from it. But otherwise the game looks not particularly that interesting. Definitely though, I think you ignore that kind of lawyer problems. You ignore those law claims, the letters from lawyers until they actually file something in the courts, and then you have to actually start responding to that. Which that is something that is somewhat on my mind as far as how bad it can really go in the court system. I do have like a Raspberry Pi project I'd like to build and sell in very small numbers, but there is so many patent trolls out there that I do have a worry that if I were to try and sell it, I would just immediately start getting patent claims and lawsuits you can only ignore so far before you're potentially spending thousands of dollars fighting to sell something that would have never even made $1,000 in profit. And at a certain level, that's where the ideas of a small claims copyright / patent court might make sense, but then also the idea of companies being able to sue you for copyright infringement or sue individuals for copyright infringement and small claims doesn't make the most amount of sense. It almost seems like there would need to be a small claims court only for businesses on businesses, and individuals should be exempt and have a higher level of protection. And the idea of businesses having different levels of protection in the court system having lower levels of protection is not something that happens. Usually it's the other way around, that businesses have higher levels of protection, not lower. Yeah, we already talked about this, but prolific game news account Nebel has quit Twitter. It was partially influenced by Elon Musk's takeover, apparently. Although I didn't see that in his fairway message. People were supporting him on Patreon. So, in a lot of ways, he had 400,000 followers. He launched a Patreon to try to make some money on it. And if you had been doing it for free up until this point, and then you're launching a Patreon, your situation has changed, or how you feel about your situation has changed, and you want to get paid. You want to turn it into a job. That doesn't seem like that that really had much to do with Elon Musk. It seems very clearly that the quote here says, Nebel said on Monday that he had not raised enough money to make running the account sustainable. So it was, this doesn't pay. And inherently doing anything on Twitter doesn't pay. And sadly, doing a lot of things on the internet doesn't pay. Let's see. There's a further quote here. Today we'll move on both from Twitter and Patreon. So he could have kept his Patreon if he was just upset about Elon Musk being in charge of Twitter. And give it time, I think a lot of people will probably be upset about Elon Musk on Twitter on both sides. Or on every side of every issue. I've learned a lot in a short period of time. Unfortunately, I was not able to create an interesting and sustainable Patreon, which is evident in the number of patrons stagnating during the first weekend and the first of many pledges being deleted during the first week. So he was particularly devastated by a lot of people saying, hey, yeah, I will support you, and then people backing out. Now would be pretty much the worst time to start a Patreon, as everybody else is broke and Christmas is coming. I've miscalculated the value of my Twitter activity and realized that it is nothing worth supporting by itself for the vast majority of people. It is not me who is popular, but it is that work that is useful. It is not valuable by itself, but a comfortable time saver, and I get that now. And if anything, that's, I think, a fair evaluation. There really wasn't much that I ever reported directly from Nebel. Although, in all fairness, who's to say that if a significant amount of news sources like Video Games Chronicles weren't heavily relying on Nebel for news sources? I was unable to create a reliable revenue stream, but I'm still happy I gave it a shot. And I want to thank everybody here who gave me a shot as well. I'll look into refunds for recent payments. I've already deactivated the billing and will likely close the page this week. The anonymous user also referenced this week's takeover of Twitter by Elon Musk factoring behind this. So yeah, they're using an anonymous source here, when in two very separate statements, Nebel does not mention anything about Elon Musk. Which, I mean, really, strike three for Video Games Chronicles at that point. The bigger issue, certainly, to point out here is, yes, you need to make yourself the product something that only you can do, and make something that makes you uniquely and individually valuable in pretty much every job. And that's just something Nebel never really did. Even his avatar here is a Mob Psycho anime avatar, so he didn't even change his face. And that's why you see like Valve News Network turning over to Tyler McVickerson and promoting him, and him specifically in part 2, is that he didn't want Valve News Network just to become a news site that could potentially replace Tyler McVickerson with somebody else. Yeah, Nebel needed to have some kind of personality or some kinds of opinions on it, instead of just being this flat retweeter and flat voice of news. Even if you are just trying to be a journalist, you don't have to lean into a agenda or a side, but you do have to have a feel of how you write things and how you say things. And even in that, you could be a journalist that just is known for being fair and balanced or very flat in your reporting, but it still needs to feel like there's a human there. Patreon, I think, in general is also a problem. as somebody who probably has their Patreon locked down again and unlaunched. And frankly, until somebody tells me that they're going to try and actually support me via Patreon, I won't bother to even check it again. But yeah, I've not so far had 0 people ever have any interest in supporting me via Patreon. It's just too much to ask. My Patreon is terrible, and it basically tells people not to support me unless they have extra money and they can really afford it, because I really don't want to take a couple of dollars away from people who may really need it to then earn 70 cents from that dollar and give 30 cents to Patreon. Now, if I was a much bigger channel, I would say at some point the statistics and the percentages make some more sense. And if I had, say, millions of followers and, say, 100 wanted to donate $5 a month, that's when you start getting into numbers of money where it starts to make some sense. Some people are rich, but not that many. Moving on, Sega is reportedly asking players what its next mini console should be. Which, yeah. I mean, they've already done all the attachments for the Mega Drive Master System, so they pretty much have to make a Dreamcast mini thing, unless they're going to just try and triple down on reselling the same thing. It's basically, this is just a survey, and Japan's not particularly shy from doing surveys and then not really doing much around it. A Amsterdam hotel manager criticized the building's undesirable inclusion in Modern Warfare 2. We regret our apparent and unwanted involvement. Which, I mean, at a certain point, I imagine those kinds of comments, if you go and ask for them, you would get that for pretty much any game or any military experience, unless you paid to license the building. At a certain level, this is something where they should have just paid for a license of the image of the building, even if they didn't legally really need to do it, just to make people happy. And who knows, the hotel manager themselves may not know that the hotel owner or whatever company owns the hotel may have gotten paid and may be very happy for a hotel to be involved. Again, though, I would say this is mostly just another clickbait article more than anything else, now that I think about it, around Modern Warfare 2. Seriously, they've talked about Modern Warfare 2 about 4 or 5 times today, and then the other 5 to 8 articles have been about something else, but I'd say at least 3 of them were also deceptive and bad journalism. So yeah, they're really obsessed around Modern Warfare 2. And I guess the question is, was Video Games Chronicles always this bad? I think it was always kind of bad. It was just like the best of a bad situation after going through like 100 video game sites. At a certain point, maybe I should just be looking at like Bloomberg Video Game News and see if they're reporting enough on video games day to day for that to make sense. Yeah, that's something to think about anyways. EA has confirmed that its Marvel deal covers at least 3 action adventure games, which, okay. So we'll see EA potentially getting back to actually making video games for a brief time. Dark Pictures Anthology has the Devil in Me serial killer trailer, and now we're at the Gamatsu articles. See if we can burn through these faster. The Forspoken Deep Dive Magic Parkour trailer, if you want to check that out. Dragon Quest X offline demo now available in Japan. A back firewall has been delayed to Q1 of 2023. I feel like we talked about all of these. Swordship launches December 5th. A 2.5D sci-fi adventure game Between Horizons has been announced for PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. Eldorand adds a Switch version and is delayed to 2023. Wavetale for PS5, Xbox Series, PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and PC launches December 12th. This was that interesting game where you're skating on ocean, which allows you to create very big ocean-like environments without having to create like a forest with a bunch of trees. So you can have these pillars of interest surrounded by very little otherwise, and yet in a funny way it really is creating a problem just because they already had a solution, which the solution here is they want you to be able to move fast and ski and skate and jump and parkour and feel like you're moving in a very far distance. But what that inherently is going to do is it's going to create some sequences, hopefully not too many, in which you are just going to spend a couple of minutes skating and skiing between one area and the next area, doing no actual gameplay that would be considered fun. Where if you didn't have the skating and skiing ocean aspects, you would have just a smaller environment in the first place, and the character wouldn't have to move so fast. I think we already talked about this, spells and secrets. It definitely feels like a lot of this stuff we already had talked about, so there must have been some glitch there. Mushroom adventure game Shumi Come Home adds a Switch version. Yeah, I spent some extra time as I was trying to run my macro thinking my macro was broken, only to realize I simply had mistyped the information into the save files, the comma separated value files. I had added a space, and so I was like, why is this not working? And it's like, why did I immediately jump to my code being wrong? It is definitely an aspect of just not being confident in your code and just expecting websites to change enough that you would have to rewrite the code. And honestly, the websites don't change that much. Sadly, it still is a case though that these UI Vision Selenium macros that I'm using, they do just kind of break. Like they just sometimes just don't work, and so you have to run it once or twice or 3 times. And so there is a higher level of knowledge about how it's working and why it isn't working that somebody needs to use them, instead of it being just idiot proof, push the button and it goes and it works, and nobody needs to know why it works. Well, this game, Colors or Grime, Colors Rot, this DLC looks kind of interesting. Acapara Games gonna publish a retro survival horror game, Sorry We're Closed. I think we watched this trailer already. I was watching a lot of trailers on Friday. Yeah, we looked at this. Yeah, why it didn't save any of this information, I don't know. Rainworld Downpour launches January 19th. Breakers Collection launches January 12th. Raw Fury is going to publish a narrative-driven horror game. My work is not done yet for PC. Visco Collection announced for the PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Switch, Xbox Series, and Switch. And what is the Visco Collection? I think, yeah, it's a bunch of old games that are mostly seem like they're clones of other games or popular games. New Cubite classic titles announced for Xbox One and Switch, bringing over Glover, Iron Commando, Brave Battle Saga, and more. Just a bunch of old games, and Glover, which is slightly newer. Story of Seasons trailer. Sonic Prime premiering on Netflix, I believe on December 15th. Yep, Netflix. I did see that there is some slight complaint around some recostuming / censorship happening in this. The white vampire girl there, you just saw her. She tends in the past, I don't know if there's going to be a way I could pause the video to really show it. Like, you'd have to move so slow. Alright, here we go. Wow, I am shocked that worked. So, in the past, she had this heart-shaped bustier that was kind of white that showed a lot of neckline. Honestly, I wouldn't even really, for a Sonic Kids game, say it really was that much cleavage, but you know how parents are. Like, anything that would show any cleavage is something that some parents might be upset with. It's kind of interesting also that they have 5 fingers. I guess the whole 3-finger concept is just going away in general, particularly I guess for Japanese shows. I imagine it always was 5 fingers for the Sonic series. So yeah, she's got a new costume. I mean, she's still got really blue, which I assume is eye makeup on it, and it's still like heart and hot pink themed. But yeah, at a certain level, the costume changed. Is that censorship? Maybe. Make your own opinion, I'll say. It is a kid's show, so you can't really complain too much about censorship for a game, for a Netflix series targeted to kids. Now, in all fairness, maybe you could argue that the level of censorship by changing the costume is not in line with let's see. Nope. Let's see if I can pause this. There you go. It may not be in line with what the rest of the amount of violence or that's in the game, but it may very well be in line with that. You can see that he gets into this alternate universe, and then there's an alternate universe version of all of the characters, and so they have different appearances on top of that. But again, no real cleavage on that character, although noticeably no blue eyelash makeup. So any parent, there's going to be a high overlap as far as parents who are upset with any amount of cleavage on a furry character. And let's face it, a lot of kids may grow up to be furries watching Sonic again. But the parents that would be upset with cleavage, and then parents that were upset with a girl that is wearing a ton of blue eye makeup, there's probably a big overlap on that group. So the people that would have pushed for censorship then immediately run into the same pushback from those kinds of overly controlling parents, in that this proves that the girl before was wearing a lot of makeup. Yeah, and frankly, I was a little shocked in watching the Netflix series The Watcher on just how much of an emphasis and how much I would have not even thought about it, but as far as a father making a huge deal about a teenage girl wearing makeup, wearing lipstick, although that series really is only like 6 episodes, and by the time she's at the end of the 6th episode, she's basically making out in a pool with a guy. So they start her off dressing like a little girl as much as they can, in like just overalls and a baseball cap, and then they try to evolve the character in too short of a time with the lipstick and being attracted to a boy. But yeah, that really shocked me. Like, honestly, I would have, if I was in charge of a little girl, said to a 3-year-old, "Oh, you want to wear like lipstick? Fine, whatever. It's basically like chapstick." Or maybe I would push them to chapstick instead, just because I think there's probably more regulated chemicals in chapstick than lipstick. But yeah, I really wouldn't have a big deal with it, but then I probably would be very quickly corrected or changed on that opinion. Corrected is the wrong phrase for sure there, but because if I was in charge of a little girl, I'd probably send her to school, and then the school would immediately have rules that they bring home that says no makeup. And I imagine even to a level of middle school, a lot of public schools and probably most private schools say until you're a senior in middle school, or until you're in middle school, you can't wear makeup at all anyways. And then they probably only let even high schoolers wear makeup because of acne and zits. That has nothing to do with video games though, and I really am just meandering today. I think we already talked about Hatsune Miku. I did hear something new about her, so they still are doing new things around Hatsune Miku on top of this Steam game, this game coming to Steam. Brown Dust debut trailer we already talked about. Yeah, there's just a lot of redundancy here. This Evo Tinction Red Virus story trailer. Oh yeah, should also be mentioned that there's a lot of hints in a comment in an email response from the makers of Project Nikke, which is coming out probably in about 5 days, that characters will be different looking as far as their outfits from the beta, and they're saying and the response was, "Hey, from the beta this looks different. Is there any plan for censorship?" And their response, from Korean being translated, I imagine the English, was, "We have no plans for censorship. However, some costumes may be changed to better suit the personality, to make them less skimpy or more skimpy." And so at a certain point it's like, well, how do you not define that as censorship at a certain point? They probably are holding themselves to the idea that nobody's forcing them to change the outfits, therefore there's no censorship, just ignoring the concept of self-censorship or changing things because you feel it would be better received or changed or sold. I do feel like there is fairly a high chance that Project Nikke is just not going to be anywhere as lewd as Destiny Child is, because Shift Up is not the only developer on the game, so they may try to go with less skimpy clothing but more voluptuous characters, but it may very well not interest anybody. I would say if Destiny Child itself was a bit more tamer in its anime waifu character designs, I would probably not be interested in the game and would have never played it for the years I have played it. This Valtherian Arc Hero School story has been delayed. Tried to look at the trailer there to see if there was anything that interests me. There isn't. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Project Nikki almost certainly flops in the first year, because it is dangerously getting to just being like so many other games. So many other gacha games that already have launched on cell phones. Story of Seasons: A Wonderful Life has added a PS5, Xbox Series, and PC version. Toho Danmaku Kagura Fantasia Lost has been announced for PC. How did this happen? Let's see. Theat Rhythm Final Bar adds more information if you want to check out that article from Gamatsu. Almost certainly what happened here is something went wrong. Either the article link that it was using as its anchor point got removed, or the programming messed up, which I don't want to jump to that conclusion. It could be that the files also got messed up. This is new. Nier Automata version 1.1a TV anime promotional file 004 Pascal trailer is available. Although if this is Pascal, that more than likely doesn't show you much. One of my YouTube shorts did get flagged for copyright, which for the Noah Chaos had Noah game that was not going to be allowed on Steam and then was allowed on Steam after the fact. It got flagged, but they didn't like take down the monetization or anything. They just, as far as I can tell, they just monitored it. It would be kind of pointless for me to try to fight a copyright flagging on a YouTube short because I'm not really adding much, if anything, to it. It probably would be very hard to defend its fair use compared to my main content, and unless it got down to the point where you're making a ridiculous amount of money on YouTube shorts and no money on making YouTube videos, it's just not worth fighting for. I do definitely worry around there being no potential of YouTube Shorts coming back and being popular months later, weeks later, years later. That being said, the whole hope of running my YouTube channel was that people would go back and watch my old content, and that's not really the way YouTube has been set up either. So yeah. Like the idea with my YouTube channel was to hopefully become popular enough to get some passive income, so when I got old enough to retire, that there'd be actual money coming in even when I wasn't making new content. And so far, no money has come in making new content or otherwise. This week's Japanese game releases has several games here. You can see only 3 of them actually physical and digital, and even at that, the digital only games list is not particularly long, so kind of a slow week. Kowloon High School Chronicle is coming to PC on November 10th. This looks like a dungeon crawler game, kind of like a maybe horror, lesser dungeon crawler Persona type game. Oh, it's this character. Yeah, they showed me pictures of that character multiple times when they were announcing this game, and then they never really showed the dungeon crawling gameplay aspect, so I had no idea what kind of game it is. I really thought that it was just going to be a visual novel. That would have been my first thought. And see, this character is kind of the only character that's even slightly interesting as far as what they've got to offer in the show. Yep. At a certain point, if this is a case where it is supposed to be like a Persona 3 Lite, it still becomes questionable whether it's really worth it to play something that's a Persona 3 Lite. Fatal Frame Mask of the Lunar Eclipse for PS4 and PS5, Xbox One and Xbox Series, Switch and PC launches March 9th, 2023, so I think we've got a new release date there, and we've got some screenshots giving us a general idea of what the game is going to look like. Which it looks okay, maybe not amazingly good. You're going to run into a problem where the backgrounds and the environments are going to need to step up as far as their visuals in a game like this, since particularly most of your game is going to be around the idea of looking in a straight area, either pulling up the camera obscura or whatever it's called, and taking photos of ghosts or just looking in a specific area. The third person perspective here are probably cutscenes, unless the whole game is still using fixed camera angles. I seriously doubt you're going to be in the actual game looking from this angle of the main character at all. In fact, I suspect you won't even really be playing from this camera angle, but maybe you will. Maybe it will be third person perspective when you don't have the camera up, and then first person perspective when you do have the camera up. And while this dress and this back is fine to look at, it's not particularly that interesting. And then when you look at the actual hallway and the walls, there's kind of a lack of polish there and a lack of detail at the very least. Gungrave Gore Brandon Heat character skin has been announced. I have no idea who Brandon Heat. Yeah, I have no idea who Brandon Heat is, so this announcement means very little to me. It maybe makes more sense to people who've watched the Gungrave Gore anime. My hand is getting sore at this point. Yeah, so A, I'm not getting very far with Yu-Gi-Oh! And B, I'm not moving as fast as I'd like to through all this news. Although, in fairness, if we had started with just the new articles today, that would have been fine. Video games, nope, we're in Gamatsu articles. Gamatsu also has the Mystical Ribbon remake being announced, and this is kind of the exact same news I said, so this is kind of an interesting example of where if Twitter were to go away, as long as Gamatsu can get this information, which they probably are getting it from Twitter, then I would still have gotten the same news. So I'm not really dependent on Twitter for that news, but my news sources as far as Gamatsu may be dependent on that news. One thing I was thinking about, and it's very possible there should be a similar thing, is that a database / email list of video game press releases, some company doing a service like that where you could subscribe to it, and then these video game sites could use that further information. Might be very helpful. Something that would be like a newswire. There very possibly is something like that. Although I was thinking a database of jokes from comedians, stand-up comedians, where you start to be a stand-up comedian, you immediately can look at this database as to who's done the same joke and make sure you didn't steal this joke or somebody else didn't say it, or you're going to say it slightly different ways, because they take joke stealing as such a big thought. If every stand-up comedian could just immediately search a database on their phone to make sure they're not stealing a joke, they'd probably be very happy for that. Although, in all fairness, I wouldn't be surprised if nearly half of all the controversies around joke stealing really come from either other reasons comedians are upset with each other, or conspiracies to create controversies so that they get more press. Almost certainly some comedians have had fake Twitter fights, or fake fights online, or fake fights in real life to promote each other. Moving on back to video games, Evil West gameplay overview trailer is available if you want to check that out. World Rally Championship Generations details its league modes if you want to check that out. Killer Clowns from Outer Space, the game, movie versus game comparison trailer, which that's slightly interesting, I think, to do. So here they're showing the original movie versus the game. Once you start to get inside the circus, though, I assume that there will just have to be a lot more square footage compared to what would have been shown in the movie. You would generally assume if you saw a big tent, circus and you went in there, it would just be a big empty tent circus, that there wouldn't be hallways or different paths. I'm not really getting a lot from this, frankly, looking at this comparison. Like, all you've really shown me here is that yes, you had source material that you could have easily digitally traced, for lack of a better term, to make it look somewhat similar. And your source here is Killer Clowns from Outer Space, which is not particularly an amazingly good visual feast of a video of a movie anyway. So what am I supposed to take from that? Is that yes, it's being somewhat accurate to the original presentation? Good for it, yay. You could have done the exact opposite. It could have been called Killer Clowns from Outer Space, the video game, and it could have been completely different clowns, completely different tank, completely different location, and very few people, I think, would have cared. Let's see. Komatsu phrases it slightly differently here. EA and Marvel Games announced a long-term deal to develop at least 3 new games for consoles and PC, starting off with September's announced Iron Man game. I suppose it is worth pointing out I'm still playing Marvel Snap, although I am really getting very close to burning out on it. Like, there really is just nothing you can do when you want to, if you want to play more after you've done the dailies. And so there are these timers on some of the dailies and weeklies where you can't just burn through it more. I'm probably, I think last I saw, I was in level 47 of level 50 is where they want you to get to on the season pass. I didn't buy the season pass, but you still get some free rewards on the season pass anyways. So unless the season pass ends right now, I imagine I will get everything, and I kind of know it won't end right now because it hasn't even unlocked the 5th week of it. It will probably end next week. Well, this is an interesting looking game, Wanted. So you've got like this dash thing. I don't get the hair flickering with fire. I think that needs to be rethought. Although it may not matter because when you're firing you may not be looking at the hair of the character. So it's a run and gun sliding game with shooting and hacking and slashing. Like, we've definitely seen these concepts done before, but they work if the gameplay is smooth and there's reasonable enough story to it. Looks like there's a lot of upgrades. I assume that this isn't a multiplayer game where your upgrades go away. This definitely feels like it could get boring though, where you're just having to kill a lot of enemies in the same area. Yeah, skipping around here, a 30-minute trailer is probably too much. It's for a gameplay walkthrough. Let's see. Konami has trademarked e-baseball Power Pros in Japan, so we can expect to see another e-baseball in Japan. They tend not to come over to the West. And then Ruby Arrowfell launches November 15th. This is a side-scrolling action-adventure game developed by Wavefront, which honestly I feel like Ruby is a failed project that has been reset as a streaming Western animation project, and yeah, WayForward probably got a nice paycheck to make this game, and now they're going to put it out there. Rooster Teeth, I believe, is owned by a bigger company, or is a bigger company than you would think, and there have been a lot of accusations and frustrations around Ruby and the creators of Ruby. So both kind of have some problems as far as having a niche fandom that's not even particularly happy with your product. At the core, I'd say part of the problem with Ruby, rebooting it's not the worst idea, but rebooting it and still going with the exact same characters and the exact same concept is kind of the problem. Like, they probably should have made a new series that didn't have characters that were just generically based off Red Riding Hood and Snow White, and I don't even know who the other two characters are supposed to even be based off of, but yeah, just those general ideas as gimmicks. Those are the kinds of things you might think of and do as a character design note, but you wouldn't make it apparent to the actual viewers of the games. Now we'll go through the games that came out on Steam over the weekend. But yeah, had they not started off with kind of a slightly jaded concept and it had actual characters better fleshed out, that may have worked. Although I wouldn't be surprised if the real problem with Rooster Teeth properties is that as much as Ruby and Red vs. Blue may have been popular in the day, it didn't have enough promotion funding to become popular enough amongst enough people. Ruby almost certainly would be, outside of being called a niche, and would be just a mainstream animated project had they simply bent over backwards and signed away their life away. I'm going to give this a follow. I don't think really there's anything here, but there might be a chance. Had they just gotten it on Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon, and that's really where it should have gone. Is that they should have bent over backwards, signed away whatever they had to sign away to just to be in the big pond and be a small fish in the big pond instead of being a big fish in an incredibly smaller pond. Kairu here. I kind of like these art style depictions, like in this one picture, but then the rest of them look pretty bad, so I'm gonna say no to this. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't even see any adult games at all today. Yeah. And it's a real shame because at a certain level, I kind of would have liked to get into Ruby, but there's a lot of stuff I'd like to get into and I just never have time for and never care enough about. Let's see. Vajont, an interactive first-person VR experience set in Vajont Valley some hours before the disaster. I don't know what the disaster is. A husband and their wife are talking about their future. The woman senses the danger and wants to leave. The husband dismisses the idea of danger. The player will determine the end of the story. What is the disaster, though? The Vajont disaster remains one of the greatest Italian tragedies since the end of World War II. So this might be an example of historical education, if you assume it's accurate and not some kind of propaganda, or even real at all. Unfortunately, like so many things that try to educate the player some level, they seem to love to make VR games. It's notable, certainly, to realize that they said nothing about VR as far as Riven. Riven very possibly will have a VR version of it, but it is not their focus now, which is good, because anybody that's focused on making a new VR game at this point is really on the wrong path. Had they announced Riven 3 or 4 years ago, there would have been a much higher chance of it being a VR game or a VR first game. Let's see. And we may be able to wrap up somewhat on time here if we can burn through all these games that have come out on Steam. We have something here, VTuber. This is Japanese only. Let's tag this a horror game. It frankly looks like it's not particularly that good. You don't get a lot of Japanese only games on Steam. Yeah, and at a certain point, I'd like to see that change. I know that there are more Japanese only games getting released for PC, but maybe not so much for PC and maybe not so much for Steam in Japan. At a certain point, I wouldn't be surprised if some Japanese companies straight up don't want to even spend the $100 to do Steam Direct or deal with Steam, or they just don't want to allow anybody to buy their games worldwide, and they would prefer to sell them very possibly as burned CDs or pressed CDs in Japanese stores. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a fairly high number of pressed CDs that still get sold that are brand new. This game, if Fusion that were that easy, is a point and click, so I'm gonna give that a follow because I'm a sucker for point and click adventures. Super Lone Survivor. Looks like it's a little dark screenshot syndrome and just pixely zoomed in. I'm gonna say no to that. Book of Fredley looks like garbage. Spooky Halloween voxel looks like nothing. Dream Wild looks like nothing. Hype Prototype looks like nothing. I'm gonna give this a follow, but this game in particular kind of reminds me of Sexy Brutale, and I really wish Sexy Brutale was a better game, because that really turned into a kind of turn off to want to play other games that have the same potential thought. Is this just a Sokoban box pushing game? I think it may very well be just a horror box pushing game. I'm gonna say no to it. Nico Necro, that's an interesting pun. I'll give this a chance, although it does look like it might be a frustration platformer that would be a little too difficult on me. This is a great example of really putting effort and polish into your black and white arch aesthetic, doing a lot of shading and a lot of variety in the pixels as far as black and white, instead of just having everything be pure white or pure black. I found an app to turn photos into paint by numbers on my cell phone, and yeah, that kind of art style manipulation or art transformation is probably something you could do similar to take a color picture and make it black and white, although that's probably not how you would do it if you were making a video game. Vintage Records from Hell. That's already on my follow list, so that was one that I think didn't have a release date, and now it does. A lot of these are coming out on Halloween, and I just don't think kids are going to be playing video games on Halloween. If anything, Halloween is one of the probably least video gamey days. Evil Nun, The Broken Mask. This probably is an asset flip horror game, but I'll give it a chance. Although it is in early access, so I would probably not want to make a YouTube short around it. Particularly now, if I was going to make a YouTube short around it, it would come out in January or February. This looks like garbage. Is this an adult game, or is this just your standard guy on guy visual novel, romance visual novel? Yep. No mature content warning, English and Russian again. It does seem like the low effort Russian games seem to come in bursts. Body of evidence. Dragging bodies around. There might be an idea here if there was more visual polish to this, but there isn't, so I'm going to say no. Sky Captain's Return doesn't look like anything. Shane Ubus. I kind of would like to potentially see Twitter people move to some new website, if there was a new website that made any sense. That is the big if, certainly. Space Bunny Explorers, I'll give that a chance. Because then maybe I could get a shorter handle, maybe then I could grow a new audience. I definitely have seen on some of the backup sites that I've tried to use for YouTube that there's there is some level of following that seems to happen there, particularly in the setups I was able to do that were just automated, that would just take my YouTube videos and post them somewhere else. That being said, I was probably around when Twitter started being Twitter, after the whole like Dave TV thing, and Twitch, not Twitter. I was around when Twitch became Twitch. And I didn't really benefit any from Twitch becoming Twitch, and I don't think most content creators or existing content creators benefited any from being on Twitch. If this had more visuals, I might say yes to it. I like the art style. It's just far too static. This is a case where this really should just be a picture book being sold, but arguably maybe picture books don't sell. And so our one adult game, it seems like today, is an early access English only game that is free to play, and it's called Dreamland. It is the realistic CG art styles of characters, although every one of these pictures definitely feel like they are more a custom screenshot more than there being an actual game here. So if there is an actual game outside of just it being visual novel showing screenshot after screenshot, I'm not seeing it. Let me just skip through the trailer. And it is lowered expectations though, but I would say the vast majority of the screenshots they're showing here, and maybe this is a bad thing in this context, is having the characters in bikinis and skimpy clothing. That being said, there is one that the very first screenshot is a fully nude 3D model of a woman swimming, snorkeling, and then about halfway through the screenshots you have a woman grabbing another woman's bare breast who's fully nude. I guess technically grabbing breast might be considered pornography. There's another one of a woman just fully nude. We're not getting the screenshots though of just like full-on penetration or being spread eagle, just things that you would really say are hardcore as far as it. So it is in an odd middle ground where, frankly, since this is already behind the adult section gate, why not have more to show on the screenshots until Valve comes out and says actually Steam shouldn't have adult screenshots even in the adult section games, which I believe is the way it should go, but it's not the way things are now, so I can't blame people for playing the game by the rules that are as they are set. Moving on, GameDeveloper.com articles. Final Fantasy XIV was a massive contributor to Square Enix financial fiscal success. We pretty much already covered that. I talked about IKEA getting a cease and desist. Sega thinks its proposed Super game could deliver over $600 million in lifetime sales. We'll see if the Super game is anything anybody even cares about, or if it is just this NFT laden garbage concept, which it may very well be. The obituary again for this Death Stranding musician, which doing music in a video game really doesn't make you feel like you actually contributed a significant enough amount to a video game to be considered a video game creator in my mind. And maybe that is a bias I personally have since I'm tone deaf and don't really care about music, but honestly, in the same way, I wouldn't think if you'd made music and then that music gets licensed for the soundtrack of a movie and is in a movie, did you actually contribute to the making of that movie? Probably not. If you composed music specifically for the movie, I guess technically you did contribute to the movie at that point. Like, so maybe he did actually compose these games for these games, and I should give him more credit. I almost certainly should give him more credit. Apparently he also has a song, or Low Roar also has a song in Arknights. So fairly obviously this is a band that has gained some popularity in Japan and Asia. Again, though, there's no obituary, not really saying what he died of or how he died or anything like that. We already talked about the Marvel games a couple times. And then Square Enix, in its infinite stupidity, I would have to say, is now going to focus on games for the global market with global market appeal, which doesn't make any sense at all, because up until this very second they've been so focused on making Final Fantasy games and Japanese games only, and they've also hurt any relationships they would have had, or gotten rid of any relationships they would have had to make games that would have that would be more global. Although maybe they are making a very specific statement that's not translating here to say, we only want to do business with Japanese companies, but we want our Japanese companies to change how they do business and have a more of a global market appeal. And who knows what global market appeal really means when said in a boardroom. Does it mean more censorship? Does it mean everything should be more family friendly? Does it mean less Japanese centric themes and ideas and more generic fantasy or sci-fi concepts? Like, this really smacks in the face of even the next Final Fantasy game, because I doubt the next Final Fantasy game is going to particularly feel like it has more global market appeal. This may very well just be them insulting the Japanese audience and saying, well, you guys don't pay enough, so we're not going to make the games that that would be more desired by you. Right, let's see. This game Ren needs more time as far as follow list cleanup. Afterlife can leave the follow list. You may have multiple follow list cleanup things. Worms Pinball I already own, so there's no reason for it to be on the follow list. It's not particularly good, but I think I bought a bundle of Worms games. That's one of those examples where just buying the bundle was probably cheaper. World's End Club is mostly positive, so I'll add it to the wish list, although mostly positive is relative here at 70. I could also have seen myself saying no to this game. Does this support English? Yeah, it says English full audio. But in a lot of ways this also feels like this is kind of like kid-friendly JRPG thing. Thrilling 2D side-scrolling action. Interesting. Well, that makes for a different kind of idea, certainly, too. Instead of getting bogged down into a slow turn-based RPG experience, which I'm getting really tired of slow turn-based gameplay with Darkest Dungeon at this moment. Worldwide Hack, I guess, is in early access, so we'll leave it on the follow list. Give it a little bit more time. World War Z Aftermath, we're going through all the W's. Yep. Is this a multiplayer game? It says it has single player. Of course. Ultimate co-op zombie shooter. I'll put it on the wish list. I may find eventually that I actually don't care about World War Z. This world splitter, we've seen this concept done several times. I'm not sure I found a single game though. I'm interested in doing it, but I'll give it more time. World Soccer Striker 91. It's probably a no, but I'll give it more time to think about. World of Haiku. It's mostly positive. I'm being fairly generous here. This is one of those weird games where the trailers are live action actors. And very rarely do you see the live action actors in dress and cosplay. So that looks very weird for their trailers. For what looks to be otherwise. It's just a hacking game. Okay, well, hacking game teaching you how to be a cyber security professional, it claims. Then World of Cube needs more time. It will undoubtedly change how I do things, I guess. I didn't even manage to special summon a single monster because my deck is not around the idea of special summoning monsters. I guess I have 29 days to do that 5 times. But yeah, if Twitter goes away and I don't find a way to replace it with something, doing the Duel Live and then checking Twitter at the end will have to be rethought, which honestly it probably should be rethought anyways because it is something that just adds extra time at the end. We've already gone 3 hours. If I could just wrap up right now, that'd be great. But if I did wrap up right now, then it'll just be more news to talk about on Wednesday. According to GameDeveloper.com, Sega plans to add more remasters and remakes into its future, which okay, that's probably a good thing. Assuming it's not just cheap cash grabs, which it may very well be, and may very well be very bad games. Very bad versions of remakes and remasters. Apparently THQ Nordic has a Halloween cheat for Destroy All Humans 2 that turns brains into pumpkins. It's actually an old school cheat code where you have to type in like west, west, south, south, triangle, triangle, x, x, y, y, or y, y, a, a. Apparently both work. No, I bet x triangle triangle xx is the same as YYAA depending on what kind of controller you're using. Which okay. I suppose it is a case that that Destroy All Humans 2 is a remake of an older game, so having just a older cheat code like that does make sense. Netflix is going to acquire, I assume, a video game company called Spryfox, S-P-R-Y Fox, F-O-X. I don't recognize that company, but apparently they made the game Cozy Grove. It does feel like Netflix is going to just try to acquire a bunch of mobile game companies to be a competitor. So the real move would be for Microsoft and Netflix to partner up to make a mobile platform that competes with the Android store and the Apple iOS store, and then they could go on a acquisition spree between the two of them, or mobile game companies, to try and make those platforms really make sense and be competitive. Yeah, it's probably in part a slow Monday as far as news. It feels like a slow Monday as far as news. because it's Halloween, which doesn't make the most amount of sense, but also because it's just Monday. Like, I really don't have anything else that came up on my Twitter feed. This may be a backdoor way in which people, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the people who watch my videos would like for me to just stop talking about video game news altogether, and there might be a backdoor way in which that becomes the only option, and the only way to go forward is to stop covering as much news, because I just stopped seeing it and stopped getting it. I really don't want that to happen though, personally. Like, me being less informed and less up on things doesn't make me feel like a better content creator or a better gamer in general. There, we opened some legacy pack tickets. Got some legacy cards. Gotta remind myself to keep up on that. And we'll take that 5 crystals for what little that's worth. And that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend to follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.